Hi, I'm Paul of Escaping the Film, and today we're going to be talking about the French romance Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Portrait really harkens back to an era of very meticulously, richly crafted period pieces. I mean, this is a beautiful film in almost every sense of the word, visually, thematically, and is really one of the best films of 2019. I'm so glad that it's finally getting a wide release here in February. In short, the movie follows Marianne, a French painter who has kind of traveled all around Europe, and she's pretty worldly, but she's still establishing herself as a portrait painter of her own, and she's kind of following in her father's footsteps. Set in the 18th century, Marianne has to go travel to the French coast on a small island where she meets Heloise, who is very isolated and has actually been very uncooperative and will not allow people to paint her portrait. Heloise is very reluctant and actually pretty uncooperative with the last portrait painter. So Eloise's mother is very intent on having this portrait created for her daughter. Eloise wants nothing to do with it, and Marianne is really tasked with this seemingly impossible objective. How do you paint somebody's very precise oil-based painting portrait without actually being able to have the subject pose? So to accomplish her goal, Marianne actually poses as kind of a friend or somebody who's been hired by the mother to just kind of accompany Eloise in her very isolated life on this island in kind of a big, large home. But Eloise is very cloistered off, very cut off from the rest of the world. So, it kind of does make sense that Marianne would be at least there to kind of at least keep her company or mind her as she kind of walks the property and is let out. So the first chunk of the movie is really just the very nuanced fun of being able to watch Marianne try to figure out and kind of catch small angles and glances and try to, in her head, calculate how is she going to take in every bit of Eloise's facial features and commit them to memory good enough to where she can actually create a fine portrait. Now, this very initial premise is actually a really elegant way to lay the foundation for the rest of the film. With the exception of the maid Sophie and the occasional comings and goings of Eloise's mother, they are pretty much left to their own devices on this island. This actually gives the women a lot of time to get to know each other, but truly connect, actually find common ground, even though they're very different people leading very different lives and with very different destinies. While the first act kind of follows a difficulty in creating the portrait, really the film gets a lot of dimension when we learn why Eloise is so reluctant to have her portrait painted and completed. As Marianne learns, is essentially a death sentence for Eloise, because once this portrait is created, Eloise is going to be shipped off to be married to the Italian nobleman that she's actually betrothed to. And that would be great, except for that's not the life Eloise wants any part of. The film delicately unravels a little bit about the fact that Eloise wasn't the first woman intended to marry this Italian nobleman. And this wasn't the life she had planned. This isn't even the life that she was living until she was pulled away from her former life and essentially said, okay, you're going to be married to this nobleman. At its core, Portrait is deeply rooted in the inequities that men have actually imposed on women throughout time. The three main characters we kind of interact with, Marianne, Eloise, and the maid Sophie, each have something in their life that they're kind of, their life isn't their choice. I mean, yes, Marianne is a career painter by trade, but she even has limitations that are alluded to because of her gender and what she's allowed to paint and what she's not allowed to paint. Eloise's storyline is actually the most upfront and obvious, relating to the theme of being able to have freedom and choice, where there's the things that Eloise very much has none of in her life. I mean, Eloise is not even allowed to walk the grounds of her property. I mean, much less have any choice about where her life is going, who she's going to be married, and what's going to happen to her. And even the maid Sophie has a plot thread that really does ring true to the lack of choice that women have always had. Even the maid, who feels like a very tertiary character at first, she gets integrated into the theme where she's an unwed single woman. She's an unwed single woman with an unwanted pregnancy. How will this completely upend her life? What choices does she have? Portrait fearlessly takes on inequity on a very fundamental level. It confronts choices and dilemmas that men have historically never had to deal with. And it is important to note that this is a film about women, told by mostly female actors and cast members. And it's about fiercely independent women in a same-sex relationship. And the importance of that cannot be overstated. quite frankly. When we talk about diversity in film, what we are actually talking about is a diversity of stories. You can only get a diversity of stories if you have a diversity of storytellers. And this is the perfect example of how different points of view are reflected by very specific artists, and they're able to tell their story. The film resists the temptation to just reduce its romantic aspects to grand sweeping gestures. Maria and Eloise actually share a relationship that is intoxicating to both of them and is quite bittersweet. The cinematography in this film is so great, it has to be singled out as something to take note of. Cinematographer Claire Mathon, who worked on Atlantics and Stranger by the Lake, frames every shot like it's a painting that could be hung in a gallery. The romantic aspects alone of Portrait actually rival those of some of the great dramatic works of 2019. I mean, it is a shame that it was not France's submission for best, not the foreign language film anymore, best, what do they call that? International film, sorry. I love Portrait so much that had it been in the best international category last year, it wouldn't have beat Parasite. I mean, that's obvious, but it should have really, it was the only real contender in my book. And to the point where Portrait of a Lady on Fire is actually in my top 10 films of 2019. As for my final score, I'm going to have to go 5 out of 5. I can't imagine even 4.9 out of 5. This is one of the very best films of the year. So I hope y'all have enjoyed watching the last few of these videos. I mean, you can tell I'm actually have a very eclectic taste in movies. I like to watch all different types of movies, and tomorrow I'll actually be doing a video review of the upcoming psychological thriller, The Lodge. You can also subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of these video reviews. I have a few more lined up that I think would be pretty interesting. I also want to go back and review movies from the past, but primarily I want to go ahead and keep movies that are kind of current and timely. In the end, I want to have reviews that are useful to people. Maybe not just movies that are coming out in theaters, but maybe movies that are coming out on streaming services or now streaming on services like Hulu, Disney Plus, or Netflix. You can actually follow all of my film reviews at escapeintofilm.com. You can follow me on Twitter at escapeintofilm. I've actually been writing film reviews for almost a decade now, and being able to do this new thing, kind of shifting it up, shaking things up here, has actually been pretty exciting. So thank you very much for watching. Until next time.